sales is the most lucrative skill in the world, period. The problem is most sales advice out there today is outdated, cheesy, and can even keep you from getting the deals that can make all the difference in your career. This is the No BS Sales School, a podcast for entrepreneurs and salespeople who want to master the skill of selling without all the BS. Listen, if you're like me, you hate doing admin crap. Number one, because you're not good at it. And number two, because you know it's taking you away from the stuff that actually makes you money. So why are you doing it? Do what I did. Go to worksby.com right now and let them pair you with a real executive assistant. Once I started working with Cheryl at Worksby, my income went up 40% in 1 month, and my working hours went from 70 down to 40. It's a game changer. Go to worksby.com right now, book a call, and tell them Walker sent you. If you do, you'll get 2 extra hours of service for free as a bonus. So if you're ready to finally stop doing the stuff you hate and focus on the stuff that makes you money, go to worksby.com right now. That's WORXBEE.com. Tell them Walker sent you, and you'll get those 2 free hours. Welcome to the WS Sales Podcast. I'm your host, Walker McKay. Today, I'm so excited to have my friend Jeremy Ruch as our guest today. Jeremy is the CEO and founder of a company called Bandalier, and they provide US-based inside sales and customer-facing teams on demand. Jeremy's going to talk to us today about better hiring practices. Jeremy hires salespeople, inside salespeople all the time, and he's the perfect guy to share with us some of the lessons he's learned and what he does to hire better salespeople. So pay attention. Welcome to the show, Jeremy. I'm so glad you're here.
Thanks for having me, Walker. Very excited to be here.
What the hell does it mean when you say you're a US-based inside sales and customer-facing teams on demand? What does that mean in English?
Well, clearly, one of the things it means is we need to develop a better description for our services, right? Because if you're asking that question, it means we're not doing an adequate job selling ourselves.
Got to make it simple, so everybody gets it.
And that's the first rule of sales, right?
Yes.
I would say put probably in its most simple form, we're in the people business,
Okay.
right? So we work with tech companies based all over the country, really based all over the world, that are looking to either experiment for the first time with an outbound sales program, or scale an outbound sales, or increasingly what we call a customer facing effort. So that's customer service, customer success. And obviously, one of the features of those types of teams is that they're centered, for obvious reasons, around people, right?
Yes,
and as it turns out, for reasons I'm sure we'll get into, identifying, recruiting, hiring people, especially in these roles and especially for these tech companies, is a really, really challenging endeavor. And so we've made that, we like big challenges. We made that the focus of our business, is figuring out how to do that really well, and then figuring out how to connect those folks with companies in need of their talent.
You will, everybody, I think, who's listening, including me, just agree that hiring and finding the right talent is among the biggest challenges of running any business, perhaps the biggest challenge. But it's something you seem to have, at least, because I don't know if anybody's mastered it. I have this theory that anybody says they're great at hiring is either a liar or hasn't done it before, or maybe did it once and got lucky.
That's 100% right.
So tell me something. I want to get into more of the details of how you do that, but I want to know, how in the world did you get where you are today? Take a couple of minutes and tell us, how did Jeremy go from, some kid in high school up to now running this company?
Well, see, really the genesis for our creation as a business was my previous role, or my role immediately prior to this, was managing an inside sales team for a fintech startup based in New York City, which is where I'm from.
Yep.
And that was, first of all, my first real job in startup land, but also my first exposure to what an absolute frigging nightmare it is to hire folks in entry-level sales roles.
Let me stop for a second, because how did you, it was your first kind of role in that. How did you learn how to be a sales manager? How did you learn what even that was?
Great question. And one of the things I learned is that most startups, including the one I was with, didn't really have a formal training program to become a sales manager, right? You kind of had as with anything else, when you're at a startup, you're building the plane while you're flying it.
Yeah,
So
sure.
I joined that company. It was a company called Bond Street, and we were part of what's called now the second wave of online lenders. What we were doing is providing small business loans
Yep.
via a sort of streamlined online process, online application. So we're working with small businesses all over the country. I was the second hire at that company,
Wow.
and my first job there was not, inside sales manager or director of sales or anything like that. It was just business development,
Go
which
do.
in its simplest form means figure out how to develop business
Go make us
when you're
some
the
money.
second hire,
Right.
right? We
Yeah.
had, I think when I joined, we had one customer. Go figure out how to get the next 1,000, right?
Yeah.
And so quite literally that meant, I mean, I joined in the summer. My first summer was I'd spend the morning sending out emails to random small businesses that I knew of, just saying, hey, can I talk to you? Not
Can we
even,
talk?
are you interested in what we do? Can I talk to you? And just
Yeah, we have. Yeah.
understanding, how to position the product. But then the afternoons were going door to door in New York City, just trying to find
Wow.
owners of small businesses. And really, the rest of my 3.5 years there was scaling whatever worked. And
Hmm.
what wound up working for us in that context was largely outbound sales, but specifically outbound sales via outbound email. So we had a
Got
pretty
it.
heavy outbound email program to the point where we were sending 10, 20,000, 30,000 emails a month,
Wow.
sometimes more, with the goal of acquiring small businesses and getting them to our loan application. So that was the effort we scaled, and that's how we built an inside sales team. And
Mhm.
then obviously there was a whole other component to that, which is once they raised their hand, expressed interest,
What do you do now?
getting on the phone with them. And one of the interesting features of small business loans generally is they are, some of the most important decisions a small business owner might make in a year.
Oh
So they're going to want
yeah.
to talk to somebody
Yeah.
but before biting the bullet.
So you went from there, and then you kind of saw a need in the marketplace, right, for other people that might not want to, especially the startups, right, that may have a great idea in mind, have a great product, whatever it is, but they got their engineers or they're probably not sales related. So you began to find this service. What was the first step that you took when you did this service to
Well,
create it?
what actually happened was, we were probably a year and a half, 2 years into this effort, and I started looking for Bandalier. Right? So I
Ah,
started
right. The
looking
company didn't
for
exist.
a company that didn't exist.
Hmm.
And specifically, what I was looking for was, man, we're based in New York City. It's real expensive to do business here. Obviously, it's expensive to hire people. It takes a lot of time that we don't have. We're out there trying to grow as quickly as possible. I would love to find a company that basically could build a sales team for me
Yep.
very quickly
Yep.
that could help me handle some of these initial intro calls with small businesses and basically qualify them. Because a lot of what we're doing in these intro calls is basically qualifying businesses, right? Seeing if they're a good fit for us. It's the equivalent of an SDR or a BDR call
Yeah.
for
Yeah.
a lot of tech companies. And so I was looking for a team I could spin up really quickly to do that. And I was
Let me clarify for a second.
yep,
SDR, BDR, what that means is appointment setter, and then there are various degrees of qualifying in that as far as is kind of how much qualification does somebody want before they get handed over an appointment. So
that's
correct.
exactly right.
Okay.
Yep. So and that could be inbound appointment setting. So lead comes in, hey, ask them these 3 questions, then set up an appointment, or it could be pure outbound. In our context, it was more inbound. Actually, Bandalier, most of what we do is outbound, but it could be either.
Yep.
And in a nutshell, I was just really disappointed by the array of options I found. It felt like a lot of the companies I was talking to at the time were sort of legacy call centers that were built 30, 40 years ago
Yeah.
for that business environment.
Yep.
Right? Maybe great fits for a Time Warner Cable, or I guess now it's Spectrum type of
Yeah.
company.
Whomever it is. Yes.
Where everything, first of all, everything's done over the phone, but also the type of I guess the type of interaction that occurs is much more scripted, right? There's not a ton of room for creativity, flexibility in
Yeah.
that
They don't want that.
interaction,
Yeah. Don't
right?
want
Because
that.
they're looking for something that's very structured. Not a great fit for a growing tech company. Not a
Yeah.
great fit for a startup. And that seemed surprising to me because as I chatted with other folks in similar roles for similar companies, we were all having exactly the same
Yeah. Right.
problem of building these teams and how challenging it was. So it felt like there was a real market need that was going unaddressed.
And so, at what point did you leave that startup to come and you say, I'm going to go start this, or did you do both at the same time? How did you make that transition?
Well, I began, I think, thinking about sort of the idea around, I guess it was the later part of 2016, wound up leaving in the middle of 2017, so August of 2017 to start Bandalier. In between, there was a lot of kind of figuring out structurally how this was going to work. So first of all, there was a question of where we were going to be based, because I was looking for specifically small towns and or cities in the northeastern part of the country where there was a large sort of pool of talent that was somewhat untapped, right?
Yep.
So specifically, the inefficiency I was trying to kind of address was this idea that there are all these tech companies based in places like New York City and San Francisco that are hiring all these people that live in New York City or San Francisco.
Yep.
And this sounds a little bit ridiculous to say now, as we're in the COVID period and people are beginning to recognize that you don't actually have to hire people who are in the same city as your company's headquarters. But even 3 or 4 years ago, that
was a crazy idea,
novel concept, right?
Yes.
Why would I ever? And we got that as an objection. No, I need to be able to swivel my chair and talk to the person who's doing calls for me. It doesn't work to have them in a different place. So to us, it foundationally just did not make that much sense in a world where there's Zoom, there's Outreach, there's Science, all these tools that allow us to communicate more easily and kind of measure work more easily, that these companies were behaving in that way. And so we felt there was this huge opportunity to go out to other parts of the country where there were huge pools of talent that didn't necessarily have access to these opportunities. And so wound up narrowing it down to a couple of cities in the Northeast, and wound up eventually selecting Binghamton, New York, which is about a 3-hour drive away from New York City, largely because it's home to one of the biggest and best public universities in the Northeast. And so what that's done is it's given us constant access to a stream of just really, really strong entry level talent.
So once you start this company, you're taking over a headache that other business owners suck at, aren't willing to do. They do it and they just, anyway, whatever. But now you've taken over this hairy mess. Tell me how you began to figure out a process for hiring people. And I don't know if that's more art or science, whichever one's harder is what that is, right? So how did you begin to figure out the process of how this should work?
Yeah, I mean, I think what you said at the outset, which is that nobody has figured this out, right? Nobody's a master of hiring. Nobody has an 100% track record on hiring. For us, we went into this kind of eyes wide open on that front. Like, it is certainly not the case that every hire we're going to make is going to be exceptional. What is important, though, is to have a clear methodology for measuring what works and what doesn't work. So from the very outset, even before the fellow who now runs our office out in Binghamton, even before I'd hired him, his first project for me, because we were working on a consulting basis, basically building out a framework for our interview process, where we would score each question very carefully. This is largely based on hunches, right? Of just, hey, here are the qualities that I think having, and he in his previous role, he's managing 300 inside salespeople. Here are the qualities that I think are pertinent or predictive of success in these roles. Here are some questions that I think could suss out those qualities, and here's how we're going to measure performance on these questions, 1 to 5. If you say this, you get a 3. If you say this, you get a 4, so that we can go back then and measure what actually works and what doesn't work.
So it's even, I love that it's not, because I've been in these interview processes before where you get 5 people with their little board and you're writing, well, how did you feel? But everybody writes a 0 through 5, but there's no this is a 3, this is a 2, this is a 5. There's none of that stuff. So you've actually scripted that out.
Well, I think the process diverges with some companies. Is a lot of companies, are using this as an opportunity to measure their interviewers, right? So they're saying, how are you individually as an interviewer? We are not big believers in that. So we don't feel like that is as effective a use of our time as saying what questions are performing best. Like, we'd rather assess the questions than the person asking them. And we'd rather just have everybody ask the same questions.
Because the process, right? The process matters. And then if somebody leaves, you don't lose part of the process, right? So you're actually creating a human-free methodology. So first question people are going to ask me and probably ask you is, so you've got these university students or this place in Binghamton, right? Where you've got this mass of people. How in the world do you get people to find you? How do they reply to an ad? Are you on the socials? How do they find you?
Yeah, it's interesting. So at the outset, it wasn't particularly novel, right? It's the same thing everyone else does. It's, you post on Indeed and you post
Google
on
Monster,
Recruiter. And because we're in a university town, so we post on the university board on Handshake, and we get a lot of applications that way. Over time, what we found is our best team members almost I shouldn't say it's up to 100% of the time. Obviously, that's not true, but it is the most predictive element, I would say, of folks' success at Bandalier is the recommendation that comes from another team member, right? So these small networks, if we find one person who performs really well for us, goes in a leadership role, and they recommend somebody, it is quite likely that that person is going to do really well as well.
Love that.
So we found those networks to be really, really important. And not super surprising that that's the case, but that's something that's become true over time more and more.
Well, especially as you built your team bigger,
right?
right? I mean, if you've got one person, it's kind of hard to, but if you have 100, you have how many callers now? Members?
I think we're up to 70, 75. So yeah,
okay.
and we've at this point hired hundreds, and even the folks who've sometimes left and gone on other things will still refer.
Yeah,
we'll still refer people.
So are you still using other channels like Indeed and those other things, and
yes.
you find those to be effective and worth? And is there some magic to how you write the ad?
There is. So especially at the outset, one of the things that we placed a huge emphasis on was the fact that we're a startup. Right. And the fact that you can have a role in actually building this company from the ground up, not just because we thought that would attract a particular type of salesperson, but actually because we were also interested, particularly as we were hiring our first 100 people, in folks who were interested in helping us build a plane while we were flying it, who wouldn't get freaked out by the concept of not having a structure in place for everything. And I think if you talk to a lot of our current team members, like that's what excites them in part, is this idea of building something.
Yep.
And we've tried to build our company in such a way as to have that culture kind of continue. So one of the things we are looking for right at the outset, and we actually ask certain questions in our interview process that really we don't think are predictive necessarily of people's sort of sales ability, but actually are predictive of how well they'll fit into this culture of constantly tweaking things, constantly coming up with new ideas.
Do you mind sharing some of those questions?
Yeah, so one of the questions that we'll ask, which interestingly we have found to be at least somewhat predictive of sales ability, is a question around an idea that you've come up with in the past that helped solve a problem for a company or organization you worked with, right? And what's interesting about this is we will have folks come in with the most elaborate ideas you could possibly think of, right? Things that a way in which they solve this massive org-wide problem, save the company they were working for, save their boss millions and millions of dollars, whatever the case may be. And then we've got folks who come in and say, hey, I was working in a grocery store and I came up with a slightly different way of organizing groceries. As a result, and interestingly to us, it actually doesn't really matter, right? What matters is that you're thinking about a problem creatively and you're helping solve problems. And you're the kind of person that will look at something and try and come up with a creative way to solve the problem. You won't get flummoxed by, a problem and just walk away from it.
And so do you have some people that say, I just can't think of one?
We'll have that happen on occasion. The other category that we'll sometimes have is folks who come in and say, they'll come up with something that's extremely basic where it's not quite clear that this really solved the problem.
Yeah, or that they even came up with it.
And that's actually the third category, right? It's folks who come in and they're like, well, my sister, my brother had this really good idea.
Yeah,
and I thought it was a good idea, so I implemented it. Or just really basic things. My brothers were fighting over what show to watch, so I suggested a third show, stuff like that. Right?
All right, so you have this methodology. So when you do the interviews, how many people actually are on your team that are interviewing these candidates? How many people do they actually talk to, and how long is your process?
So we start with, at a high level, just a screen of kind of their qualifications, not necessarily because we, do a whole lot of disqualification on that basis, but because it helps us peg them to, roles that we have and things like that, and just kind of categorize them. And then, and we're also looking out for sort of basic errors on that front. So if you're applying to a job at Bandalier, strongly recommend you look at your resume. If you're writing in a letter or anything like that, spell check it, just make sure there's no grammatical errors. So that's one thing we're looking for. And the reason obviously is that if you're in a client-facing role, that's something our clients are looking for too.
People care about, yeah. So you just take the resumes and look at them and look for, what's something interesting. Do you not get, I did this for a tech company one time, and the people we got applying, everybody was anywhere between 18 and 27, and they'd all worked in a damn coffee shop, and they'd all done these. So how in the hell were we supposed to pick, even screen people out of that? How do you deal with that?
Well, there's two ways you could do it, right? You could screen them out based on the experiences they've had. So as an example, we've got, there are certain companies like ours that will say, we don't want to hire anybody without a degree, right? Or we don't want to hire anybody who hasn't had this type of experience. We actually don't do that. When we're looking at resumes, we're much more focused on the content of what's in there. And I don't care if the only job I don't care if the only jobs you've ever had are working in coffee shops or, working at Applebee's or, working in any role. It's how you describe it. Right? How do
Ah, I
you
love
describe
that.
that experience? What's actually in this document? Are there a whole bunch of basic errors that suggest that you're not the kind of person that spends a ton of time kind of reviewing things and making sure that they're up to snuff? Or, is this a really good description of what you did in a coffee shop? And if it
Thoughtful.
is,
They
yeah, we
spent
want to
some
talk to you.
time on it. They put themselves and their
Exactly.
personality into how they describe, which also shows a sense of pride and as well, correct?
That's exactly right.
All right. So you screen the resumes, and you look through initially, and then
Yep.
what do you do?
Well, we've got a phone screen that we'll do.
Yep.
And that is really, a combination of two things. The first is sort of a very basic, because you will have the case where you call somebody and they don't even, have a basic understanding of what we do
Yep.
or what the role they applied for is. And obviously we can disqualify them at that point. And then we do ask certain questions in that screen that are similar in nature, or at least trying to suss out similar qualities to what we'll do in the following interview, which is a face-to-face interview.
You mind sharing one or two of those questions as well?
Yeah, so we'll ask about a time that, and as I told you before, I mean, if folks are listening to this, I hope you take note of these. Unless we change the process, you will be asked these questions.
Right.
Hopefully it'll give you a bit of a head start.
Yep.
We typically ask folks about a time they failed at something and what they learned from that experience, or a time that they set a goal and were off track to hitting it and what they did. To get back on track. So those are, a lot of questions about their experience in that respect. Mm-hmm. And then certainly the first question we always ask is about, what you know about Bandalier and this role specifically. So if you're listening to this already, you probably know quite a bit. Good. Quite a bit relative to our typical applicant.
And so at what point do you start, quote, selling the company?
Our view is that the process for selling the company actually starts before they even apply. I mean, our process for selling the company starts in the job description.
Right. Yes.
And, it's funny. I sometimes will listen to these interviews. We'll do interview reviews right now where we go through an interview and say, hey, how are we doing in terms of grading these questions in a consistent way and presenting the company. And I actually sometimes say, hey, we're almost spending too much time talking about, because the interviews get really long. We're spending so much time selling the company. But I also, I always kind of have two minds about it, because on one hand, it lengthens out the interview and takes hours and all that kind of stuff. But the flip side of that is I think it's a really, really important component of what we do in the interview is first of all, selling the company, but also sort of ensuring there's a mutual fit, right? Our 100%. Interviewers are real honest about, about what the work involves. It involves calling people 50 to 100, sometimes even more times per day, right? Yeah. And in most of those interactions, you're not reaching somebody or you're getting hung up on. Hey, are you the kind of person that is going to thrive in that type of environment? Because there's a lot of types of people that would not. And it's nothing on them. It's a tough job, right? Oh, so, I think we sell what we view as the advantage of working for our Bandalier in terms of your career, in terms of where it can take you, in terms of the, first of all, sales acumen and skills that it gives you, which I think are relevant pretty much in any career.
Any career, right? If
100%.
You're somebody who can bring in your own leads, you are you're extremely valuable, much more valuable than someone else is relying on leads from somebody else.
Well, and even just absent the picture of leads, right? If you're the kind of person that can sell, if you're the kind of person that can ask really good questions the way you are now, right? That is going to give you a leg up in just about any career you wind up picking for yourself. So, you have those advantages. Having said that, it's a tough job. And
so one of the things I like that you're doing, I have watched a lot of interviews and have heard about a lot of interviews where the person who's interviewing ends up doing more of the effing talking than the person who's being interviewed. They feel like it's a blah, 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 and they won't let which again, I think a lot of salespeople do that when they talk way more than they're asking and listening. So I love the fact that you're structuring this with questions. All right, so you go through a phone screen, and do they talk to one person on the phone screen? Is that the way that works?
Typically, it's one person on the phone screen and then two in the face-to-face. Yep.
Okay. And so how many people typically would make it through the phone screen? Would you say yay or nay on? Is it 50%? Is it 30%?
I think at this point, these metrics change. And the other thing that's actually happened just in the last few months that's complicated things from a metric standpoint is it used to be, believe it or not, we did what we called a phone screen and then a phone interview. Phone screen was really just to make sure they picked up the phone.
Yep. Right.
They could answer that. Why
they were there when they said they were going to be there. You got a meeting at 10:30. They show up at 10:30. Yes.
Exactly. Since then, we've started consolidating, but I would say it is certainly fewer than 50% at that point that are making it through to the
Okay.
virtual interview.
All right.
I think at this point, it's probably closer to 20 or 30%, and then you go into the face-to-face interview.
Okay.
The face-to-face obviously is no longer literally face-to-face.
Yeah.
It's virtual. It used to be face-to-face, but that typically involves two interviewers. The
Okay.
reason we do that is because, again, we're scoring out all these questions. We want to make sure that there's two voices in that room in terms of scoring out the questions, and that it'll very often happen that we're looking at the rubric, and I'll do these interviews sometimes, and I say, I thought that one was a 4, and then the person I'm interviewing with says, no, it was a 5, and here's why. And
I think the key is that you've got a here's why, and that's what's so cool is it's not just a gut check of 1 through. It's because they match this. I mean, I think that's super thoughtful. That's really great.
Well, I think that one of the flaws we've seen and I shouldn't even call it a flaw because it's really just a different way of doing things, is a lot of companies score out interviews, but when you do it in a generic way of 1 to 5 stars, it still, in our view, allows the traditional forms of bias to come into the question. Right? If you've got somebody in a suit and tie, a really nice dress, dressed well, coming in and delivering one answer, even if you're grading it on a specific metric, even if you're just saying, how are they communicating, diligence in this answer, let's say, rated on a scale of 1 to 5, and then you have somebody else who might be dressed differently delivering that same answer, you might still find variance in the score. Now, if you're doing it in a way that you have to grade this type of answer a 4, this type of answer a 5, this type of answer a 3, well, you might find, I think, over time that you're going to get a little bit more consistency in the scoring. And that's really our goal in this process, to eliminate bias and not necessarily ask perfect questions. We found some questions we've asked in the past actually aren't relevant. We've gotten rid of them because we haven't found them to be predictive of success in these roles, but at the very least, we're measuring it.
And so when you go back, when somebody leaves, you actually go back to what was done in the interview, and you can go back and say, shit, we should have asked this, or this question we didn't pay close enough attention to.
100%. That's actually something I at least do pretty regularly, is go back. If we have somebody that flames out, I'm going back into the records and saying, hey, what questions did we ask and how did they do on these questions?
Among the things I love about that is that, once again, you're taking responsibility, because I hear a lot of business owners, people that hire, say, there are just no good candidates out there. We can't hire anybody that stays. They all suck. Millennials, blah, 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 whatever. And it's bullshit, right? We got to take ownership for that. We hired the wrong person. We didn't handle it. We didn't get them on board correctly. We did it wrong. And that's what I hear you saying. You're going back and matching and seeing what worked and what didn't and correcting the mistakes.
I think what you're saying there is so important on a bunch of different dimensions, right? Like, this concept of this person was no good or is good is like, it creates so many toxic elements or so many toxic behaviors in the interview process, because invariably, if that's how you're talking about people, what winds up happening is you hire the people you like the most, right? Or you would most want to be friends with, most want to grab beer with, right? And so one of the things we're often talking about is, hey, this is a great person, right? We're not doing them any favors by putting them in a role that's not a good fit for what they're interested in. Somebody comes in, great person, gregarious personality, somebody I'd like to be friends with, happens all the time. But, if the example they're using around, as an example, a time they failed at something shows that they got, really, really flummoxed by it, and it really affected them in a personal way, and they weren't able to get past that. That's not to say they're a bad person.
No.
Right? There's a ton of people like that. Or somebody who doesn't necessarily have a ton of grit or resilience. Like, that's not necessarily a bad person. That's just the kind of person who might not want to make 75 to 100 cold calls per day. And God bless them. A lot of people wouldn't. Right?
Hell no. Right?
That is not a reflective, that's not a judgment on them as a human being. That is a judgment of them in their applicability to this type of role. And so, as an example, we've got a lot of folks who come in who might be a great fit, as an example, in a military-like situation where they're giving very, very specific instructions, and they're really, really good at rising through the ranks and kind of thinking in that way and thinking in a really structured way. Might not be a perfect fit to the creative and kind of building plane while flying structure I just mentioned. So, there's a lot of stuff like that. And I think getting out of the realm of viewing it as a 0 to 1, like good person versus bad person, is incredibly important.
I also believe that when you hire the wrong person for a job, despite everyone's best intentions, you're keeping them longer from getting to the place where they should be, right? Yep. You're keeping them from being in the market where the place they could go find. And I find this often with people that are holding on to employees too long that aren't a fit. And I say, you are keeping them from going to find the place where they could be a fit. You're not killing them. You're just letting them, as we say, making them available to industry where they can go find their own thing. But I think owners do have to take responsibility for who they hire, how they onboard, how they train, how they keep and retain people. It's not just shitty people. You're the one that hired them, right? There's no such thing as shitty people. So,
well, just the word fire like has such a aggressive bellicose kind of connotation. The reality is like, yeah, I think you're 100% right. I mean, we've gotten notes from people that we've had to let go a year later. It's like, hey, you changed my life in a good way. I'm now in this role. Thanks so much for identifying that this wasn't the right fit for me and for helping me turn my life around. Like, that in some ways is really gratifying because you're reminded, oh, yeah, this isn't this isn't the 0 or 1 kind of thing that a lot of folks make it out to be.
And not to mention, I would assume that a lot of people, your alumni club is going to be extremely powerful over time because my guess is a lot of people that are coming to you are not seeing this as a 40-year career.
I think that's right. I mean,
maybe some do. I don't know that, but
well, I think it sort of depends. I mean, the paths. First of all, I think you're right. We hire a lot of folks at the early part of the career have no idea where they want to be necessarily in 40 years, right? We've been, some of them we've hired folks who want to go off to law school or medical school and want to add sales to their toolkit, which I think is awesome.
Yes,
because they know it'll be relevant in those professions. The 2 paths upward within the company we see for folks, one is into leadership and management, right? So folks who want to manage large teams who are really kind of interested in the psychology of human beings and what makes them tick and how to make a team work are often really good fits for our leadership roles. And the second is, we got some folks who say, I have no interest in that, and I do not want to be accountable for the performance of a team. It stresses me out. But hell, I love to sell, right? Like that's what I want to do all day. So more and more, we're trying to focus on creating paths for folks to actually move up into those types of roles as well, where they're in account executive roles or just roles that require more sophisticated selling techniques.
So you have, and we're getting closer to the end here, but you've got, you have a face-to-face interview with 2 interviewers. You score them at that point. Are you saying we need to hire 3 people, or are you just always hiring? And if you find a good one, we're going to put them in. How does that work?
Well, actually, that's changed over time because it used to be the case that was exactly that way. We had a client that came in, needed to hire somebody, we would go out and hire them.
Yeah.
Now we've built out a service we're calling Talent as a Service, which is basically a portal that we have of candidates that have passed a certain benchmark in our interview process that are looking for roles in sales. And that actually allows clients who aren't necessarily interested in our managed service, by which I mean the service where we're doing not just outbound sales, but some form of sales consulting too. Right? We're also doing like analytics and strategy, helping build lead lists. Now we also offer Talent as a Service. We can just hire SDRs who made it through our process directly. And what that allows us to do is always be hiring, right? And just kind of have a rolling roster of folks who, are really talented, are going through or will be going through a training process, and are looking for, these connections to really cool tech companies. So no, now more and more, we're always hiring.
Smart. So can I tell you a couple of things that I've learned that I think are super impressive? Number one is that you have not just 7 questions for the phone interview, but you have a whole methodology for how do we score this thing. I think that's so important. And I think very few people have thought that through. I think we're all ultimately going with our gut. And what you've done is taken your gut happens when you create what are the proper answers and how do we score them. I think that's because it takes a lot of the subjectiveness out of this thing. I also like that you're looking at resumes as a way to see how did somebody write this, right? Do they sound like a corporate wonk? Do they sound like I cared? I mean, how are they describing their positions and what they did? And does it sound important? Or does it sound real, I guess? And so I love that. That is freaking just gold for people. I hope No BS Sales team is listening to that and taking notes. You ought to be taking lots of notes. Hey, Jeremy, how would somebody get in touch with you either to, or how would somebody reach you if they want to talk to you, find out about what it takes to work with you, either as a client or as a salesperson?
Yeah, so you can reach me via email, old-fashioned, Jeremy, Jeremy, at bandalier.co.
Spell Bandalier because I spelled that wrong 3 times.
Yep. That's one of the issues with our name. It's B as in boy, A as in apple, N as in Nancy, D as in deer, A as in apple, L as in Larry, I as in Iowa, E as in Erie, and R as in row.
Perfect. How'd you come up with that name?
That's a real long story. We have time for that?
No. We'll invite you back next time for that. How about that?
I'll come back next time.
All right. No BS Sales team, I hope you've enjoyed this conversation with Jeremy. He is such a smart guy. He's got a great company. At least one of my clients has hired him to help. So if you want to reach out to me about experience, I'm happy to talk to you about that. I've gotten a bunch of emails from you guys lately about things that you've learned on the show. That matters a lot to me. I appreciate the feedback that you've given me, and even I've gotten some ideas about guests to have. Thanks. Keep those coming. Walker@walkermckay.com. We have a newsletter that we send out once or twice a week. And if you'd like to be on that list, if you will email me, walker@walkermckay.com, I will add you that list. We send out kind of tips and thoughts and things we're reading and things we're talking about that may help you make a better sales career. And you can learn some stuff we're doing here. So please reach out, walker@walkermckay.com. Go to our website, walkermckay.com, and come back. Please be sure and smash the subscribe button and the like button. Give me 5 stars. Let's make this thing even bigger than it is. I think we've passed our 100th episode now, so I think I'm going to stick with this thing for a while. Yeah, it's good. So Jeremy, thank you so much for being here with us. I appreciate you very much. You're a great guy, and I hope other people reach out to you.
Thank you. And likewise, Walker. Really grateful that we crossed paths and grateful you had me on. Thanks so much.
Sir.